Welcome back everyone. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Torkel Strömsten. I'm the platform director for one of the platforms here, the accounting platform. And together with my colleague.
Yes, I'm Emma Sjöström. I'm the co-director of the Sustainable Finance Initiative at Misum and also a research fellow at the Department of Marketing and Strategy.
Mm-hmm. So together with Emma, we will host this session during the coming hour, and we have a fantastic set of participants, panelists with us today. We are very happy that you are here, and that's also something that represents something important for both Stockholm School of Economics, but also Misum, the engagement and the continuing discussions that we have with practice, basically. So over to the panelists, I would like to introduce first Tony Sandberg. Tony Sandberg is the director of e-mobility scale-up at Scania, and also the former director of research innovation there at this company, where he has spent some 25 years.
Yes, thank you.
That means that you were just a kid when you went into the doors at Scania. Yes,
started early.
Yeah, and you also, but you also been very active outside Scania in different boards and for driving sustainability in the transportation sector, including Drive Sweden, the Strategic Vehicle Research and Innovation Program, and you also are the chairman of the board of Integrated Transport Research Lab at the Royal Institute of Technology, and also the initiator or one of the initiators behind this, the partnership between Scania and SSC.
Yes, that's correct.
Very nice and happy to have you here. Then we have Karin Stenmar, representing Folksam as the head of sustainability. You have 20 years of experience working with sustainability.
That's right.
At the last 5 years at Folksam, but before that also very active in the apparel industry, both as an entrepreneur and working as a sustainability manager for one of the major brands here in Sweden. So super nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And then we have Johan Florian, who is head of communications and ESG at AP7, the 7th AP fund, which is the state alternative to the private investment funds that are offered in the Swedish premium pension system. And you have also been working with sustainability for a long time, both you personally and the fund itself. And the fund represents something like 850 billion SEK now, a lot of global equities, some fixed income. And you were also the chair of the Sciencebased, Sweden's investment forum for sustainability a few years ago. And then we have Vanessa Patani, who is Vice President Group Sustainability at Electrolux. So I guess most people viewing this have some of your appliances in their homes. And so Electrolux then being a Swedish multinational in the home appliance sector. And you lead something called For the Better 2030 framework at Electrolux, which hopefully we'll get to hear more about. And then we have Henriksson. You're the CEO of the new venture, H2 Green Steel, which was established just last year to produce fossil-free steel, which is, of course, interesting because the steel industry is a big emitter. I think it's 25% of the European level industrial CO2 emissions is from the steel sector. And here in Sweden, of course, the biggest CO2 emitter in the corporate sector is a steel company. So that's interesting, a company that's built all around climate solutions as a business model. So back to you, Torkel.
Fantastic. So coming back also to the theme of this annual the forum is responding to climate change challenges and potential solutions. We thought that we should stick to this theme basically and get the challenges up on the table and then move on to the potential solutions. So if we are thinking about the challenges now, and I'm asking you, Karin, representing the insurance company Folksam, I mean, what would be the biggest challenges for you relating to climate change?
Well, there are many, but one of the greatest challenges right now, or in long term, is actually how to reduce the risk of increasing nat cat costs, the natural catastrophe costs. We can see that the past 3 decades, we doubled the cost related to extreme weather events, and it will get worse for sure. As a role as an investor, then we have to secure that our customers' pensions and saving actually continue to grow, both short and long term. So I would say that those two is the greatest challenges for us in our industry.
Interesting. Thank you. Tony, what about a company?
The transport industry is a big cause of the climate change and the big emitter of carbon dioxide. But we also have possibilities to influence that. So we're working really hard now on improving the current offering to the market, improving energy efficiency and lowering the carbon dioxide emissions from that. But we're also at the forefront or the doorstep of a new technology shift going into electrification of the transport that will actually transform the business model and the setup of the transport industry. So right now the big challenge we have is dual operating system. We need to do both at the same time. We need to balance investments and efforts in both sides.
Let's come back to that, because I think that's the main challenge for many organizations, that you have to do both, continue to do what you already do and then also shift over.
Yeah,
good, thank you. So let's hear from Henrik. You also represent something else. You have also connections to some other companies in this room, as we already know, both sitting on the board of Electrolux and prior CEO of Scania, and then you chose to do something else.
Yeah. No, but this the steel industry is one of the biggest emitters in the world. I think the number is 8% of the global CO2 emissions. So one of the so-called hard to abate industries. I think an industry also that is regionalized and also linked to sort of defense policies from historical reasons and so on, which means that there is a political sort of ring fencing around the industry. And I think that has hindered a transformation historically. So not only technology, but I think also legacy. But now at least the technology is there to transform, and it is possible, which in our case will be to produce then steel that will reduce CO2 with around 95% compared to the traditional route by 2024. So just 3 years from now, and yeah, that's the way forward.
That's the way forward. Interesting. Yeah.
And Vanessa, you're in a consumer-facing industry. What would you say are some of your greatest challenges?
And I think that's exactly right. Being with the consumer and driving change, getting people to change their behaviors is really very, very difficult. So, I mean, we know that 52% of people say they would like to be more climate conscious, but they're not living the way they'd like to. So that makes it really difficult. And we know there's a lot of challenges for people to do that. And part of it is not knowing what to do. So I think, I mean, from our perspective, it's really about creating obviously the best products that we can, right? That are most resource efficient, that are circular, but also then educating people on why it's important to buy those products or look at the products they have and how they use them. And then once they have the product in their home, use that in the best way possible to reduce the emissions and the energy usage really, and make their clothes last longer, make their food taste better. So for example, you know, moving to a plant-based diet, perhaps we all know that we should, but we know from a consumer perspective that it feels like it's hard to do it. I don't know how, it's not going to taste good, right? And we know we have solutions that can help people with that, but also need to just talk to people about, you know, there are ways to do it and it doesn't have to taste bad, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, we'll come back to that as well.
Great.
And Johan, from the investor perspective again, what would you say is some of your greatest challenges?
Well, if I look at the finance industry as a whole, I would say, I mean, clearly things are not going the way they should. If you look at the general development and then you put the energy crisis that seem to be coming up in Europe, etc., it's really depressing. And so one conclusion for us is that what we're doing now is not enough. We have to do something else, and something with greater impact that contributes more. We're not going, I mean, expectations on the finance industry is sometimes a bit too high, but still I think we have to do other things and more focus on what is giving real results and the real economy. And then of course you have the issue of risk too, to be better to map it and measure it and make give the market better opportunities to, in a correct way, put a price on risk, I think.
That's interesting. So if we look at the opportunity side, because even though we have grand challenges to solve for business, there's also, of course, an opportunity to be part of the solution and so on. So would you have some comment on the opportunity side from your perspective?
Yes, definitely. I mean, going electric with transport is a great opportunity for us to reduce the emissions of transport. It comes with a lot of new hurdles and new business models, new collaborations. But I think the most important one is that we need to ensure that we have green electricity available at the point and time where we need it, because electricity cannot be stored. And that is something that we sometimes forget in the transport industry, because we are used to using diesel and fossil fuels that are available to store and use when we like to. So that is a new barrier that we need to embrace and work together with partners to find a solution for.
Opportunities, Electrolux?
Definitely, I think this challenge that I mentioned is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? And it's, for one, us obviously being able to get closer to our consumers, but then I think the other opportunity really is working together with others. Because as I mentioned, I mean, moving to a plant-based diet, you might not think immediately of your fridge or your oven that can help you do that, right? But I think us working with many other players, be that in other industries or like in the food industry, but even NGOs or others, to raise the topic and really help people understand. But I think it's also really about this sort of subtle nudging and doing things that people don't really notice that they're making a change. But realizing, I mean, for us, we obviously want the important thing to be that people recognize Electrolux as being an important player here and one that you can trust to do this.
Yeah.
If I may add, also this journey that we are on is an opportunity for us to attract very talented people, very high motivated people that want to be part of creating the solution. So that is currently a success factor for us.
Yeah, I would wholly agree with that. I mean, people come to us because they say, we've seen what you're doing, we want to be part of this, and how can I participate? And,
What about you? I don't know if you managed to watch this session this morning about the TCFD reporting framework, and is that something that could be seen as an opportunity for the investment community to risk, to price risk?
Definitely. All these, I mean, there are several of those. TCFD is maybe the most well-known within that area now. There's a new one that was launched last week, TNFD, looking at natural capital. And I think that the development of global standards is key. As long as everybody's running their own project and have their own yardstick, there will be a lot of complexity and impossible to drive specific metrics, etc. So this type of work is important, even though I would say that TCFD have to develop further. And I think that it's a responsibility for the investor community to come up with more precise the assumption that these scenarios, etc., are built on, they will probably not be the same in every sector, so you have to be very hands-on. But this is also a great opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Good. What would you say, Karin?
Yeah, the opportunities are that if you're a sustainable investor or responsible investor, you also can influence other industries and companies actually to set science-based targets, for example, which is definitely a big need to make this transformation faster, as you said before, Johan. So I think this is a great opportunity for us within our sector, and also when it comes to Europe and Sweden as countries globally. I think we actually are front runners and we can do much more, and we need to do it faster. So I guess together with others and to set science-based targets for this UN convened Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. It's a new initiative there we actually institutional investors can come together and set targets for 2050 as last where you should have net zero emissions from portfolios, but also to make a change in the real economy, not just to exclude companies that actually are great emitters today, more to actually hold their hands or actually push forward transformation and to become net zero is much more important. So I guess this is an opportunity for us.
Let me just comment on that. I think science-based targets is something that I think we used to work on and I work with in history now. We implemented it in 2018, I think it was, in Scania then at that time. But the learning there is that if you link science-based targets to your strategy and you work with all the targets and then include also upstream scope 3, for example, it is extremely powerful tool to create transformation. And it's much sort of higher ambition than a general sort of framework of comparing industries or comparing sectors. So I think you're right in pushing that will create like this lever for change. And you commit to your own organization, you commit to your customers, you commit to your investors, and you commit to society. So it's a powerful tool.
Talking about bringing up the organizational transformation and the way, I mean, you manage that, and now you are in the midst of making this shift, Tony, and you've been part of it. And could you also say a few things about the big challenges there early on when you identified that this is the way we are going? And I mean, and now you are at a different place, but back 5-6 years.
I think it doesn't matter if it's a big or a small organization. I think it's about anchoring a direction and a clear purpose at the top, and make sure that is for real. Anchor that in some sort of culture, values, DNA that you have in the company, so it's not like a campaign or a project you run side by the rest of the organization. And the science-based targets, then you get traction. But people need to understand why. So even if you have an organization with 7 levels or 2 levels, people need to understand why you do it. And I think if you connect that then to a strong purpose, you don't create a separate sort of sustainability strategy, you have a sustainable strategy. I think then it doesn't matter the size of the company or which industry you're in, a sector. I think then you get people with you. And when you get people with you, things are happening by itself. And then
but really something happened around 2015. If you count the word sustainability in the Scania annual report, something happened between 15 and 16. And so that's, I mean, an important signal also, as you say. Scania is such a, I mean, obvious example of transformation of company, but Electrolux is also, I mean, the issue and the challenges are at the user side very much. Could you also elaborate a little bit?
Sure. I mean, when we look at sustainability, we obviously look across the whole company, right? So we talk about our own operations, which we talk better company, and for the better framework you were talking about, so better company. Then we've got the solutions and better living. Solutions is about our products. Living is about how they're really used out in society and behavior change. And we know that about 85% of the impact of a product comes in when it's at somebody's home, in the use phase, as we call it, right? So we can do a lot, and we have done a heck of a lot with our manufacturing and our own sort of cleaning up our own house. We have a ways to go, of course, but we've done a lot there. But really, the important thing is to address this. How are these products created? Or sorry, how are, like, what are the features that we have in the product so that they are, as I said, resource efficient, and how are people using them? And to get through there, I think we have to work across so many parts of the company. I mean, you and I have discussed as well about the sales team as well, and now we're seeing coming from the other end. Obviously, we have many customers asking us these questions, defining their own criteria that they want us to answer about. And I see really the opportunity here to join together with them as well to get our messages out, because we see it so easy. I mean, there's a green stamp on something, or there's a, you know, eco label, or the green frog, or whatever it is, right? But it gets very confusing. And when everybody's defining it in their own way, then how are you supposed to compare, and how are you supposed to understand as a consumer? And then you just sort of give up, I think, as well.
I perfectly agree with both of you. It's really about people changing mind and changing behavior. So it's absolutely crucial that we understand the why, and as Scania we have done it, but then we need to figure out how fast and how. What do we mean by sustainability? Is it bioenergy? Is it electricity? Is it green? And how do we define that? Where does the start and end point that we measure in the science-based targets start and end? What's the scope? And also how fast we are right now in a booming market, demand on the current product, the current market. How do we incentivize the salesperson to sell something that's a bit more complicated, takes longer time to sell, and is more unsecure? And how do we balance the investments in our company when we won't like to have a big return on investment in the balance sheet and the report? So those balancing things are really where we stand right now, I would say. How to take next step.
And you were talking about how the users are so important, and that value chain perspective, of course, becomes very important for all companies. And I'm thinking for Scania, for example, it must be also for you to be able to achieve your climate goals and your commitments. Some of that is going to happen among your users.
Yeah. And they are not alike, all of them.
No.
They are rather different. Some want to have return on investment and they want to have the traditional product forever. We have illustration internally that we say, I want my fax machine back. They want to stay there.
Yeah.
But there are others, inventors, early adopters that want to have the latest technology. They want to take risks. They want to share risk. They want to work together with us. So we have a big variety of customers, and they are also different in different parts of the world. So that's kind of complicated how to match all the needs at the same time.
I think to your point there also is interesting. I mean, because we've had these kinds of discussions too, where, okay, then let's start something with somebody who is interested and we can do it. And then we notice as soon as you start doing something here, then the next person comes like, why aren't you doing that with us? We want to do that too, right?
Yeah,
so you can really, you just have to
That's
start.
the strategy we are applying right now.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Actually, we try to work with our customers, and we see that if we calculate on the risk for an injury to occur, if we try to prevent that injury to occur, and we help our customers by a price reduction, for example, vehicle insurance, that's a great incentive for a person to choose a more sustainable car. So we can actually work with the products and a price model with carrots and sticks to find new ways for the early adopters, maybe, but still.
I think coming back to your question about value chain, I think that's the right approach. That you need to think sort of outside your own sort of territory or little box. And I think a great example of thinking about your customer's customer and actually what is making them tick. If you have that in your value chain, I think it's a very powerful tool. If you understand that, then you can create a pull from your prime customers. One example now, working with green steel, trying to sell a product that is more sustainable, that maybe is more expensive because of renewable energy. So if you come out and say that this is 25% more expensive, half will say, then it's not interesting. But if you understand their business and you know that if you take steel and how much that is together with rubber and glass and aluminium and plastic in a vehicle or in a fridge or a freezer, then you realize that it's probably around 1-2% on the product cost. That you add the value in a few years when you have availability of these sustainable sort of scope-free upstream sort of input values. And if you start talking like that, would you be willing to sort of test with your customer to increase the price maybe with 3%? Can we do that? And you put it into perspective. I think that's so the logic of thinking about your customer's customer, I think, and that way challenge a little bit your business model. I think is a powerful tool.
It's interesting also because with steel, you don't see the steel. It doesn't, it's harder to make the connection to an average consumer, perhaps. It goes into construction, it goes into a lot of, a bridge or a house, and
but it's also business to business. I mean, it's in a way easier for those kind of companies. I was thinking exactly if you are a consumer-based business, you have millions of users. And how do you engage them? How do you make them change behavior?
And I was just going to say, on your point, Henrik, I think that's super strong, right? Because we just did research on recycled plastic, actually, and putting recycled plastic on the inner liner of a refrigerator. And we had great results. People both said And these are first results, so we have to do more research. But people both said like, wow, it looks great. I really like this, but also I'd be willing to pay more for this, right? And we're going to dive into that a little bit more so we can see. But I think definitely to your point, you got to tell people, especially when it comes to consumer, when it is a little bit more emotional, when part of it is like, yeah, I can tell my friends, look, my fridge has recycled plastic in it. Isn't that cool? And you know, we had, I think, 50% recycled plastic, and they're saying, why wasn't it 100? So people want it. And that was so encouraging also for us and for our teams to know, okay, we're onto something here. We can do more of this.
And we are applying the same thing. I mean, we're going from a system that is stable, where there is roads and there's diesel fuel available all around the globe. And when we go into electrification, we need to ensure, together with the value stream customers and partners, that we have energy, that we have charging stations, that we have the grid connections, that the trucks can stop there, that fits their logistical setup. And we need to have the operators, our customers, involved in this chain. So we need to talk to everybody here to find a solution that fits everybody. And that's part why we're moving now from products into solutions. We cannot develop and sell everything ourselves, but we can do it together with partners.
Interesting. Yes.
And talking about communication, I think, sorry, it's just that I think also that many companies don't communicate enough about what we actually do to this transformation. I think we do more than the consumers know. When we try to go from a linear to circular way of handling claims. And we've done that the past 5 years. And when we tell our customers that you actually save CO2, you save waste, and we actually also save money in reduce and recycle parts, then they get more satisfied. And we actually measure that. So it's right there in the facts and figures. So it's quite interesting, because I don't think we know that the power of the engagement in our customers. So I think we have to do more, communicate more.
What about users in the pension systems?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a challenge, of course. A lot of people, you know, the orange envelope that you get, they don't even open it, just throw it right in the basket. So communicating in general about pensions and things like that is hard. Within this area, there's a small group that is very engaged. So it's not a homogeneous target group. I think that this change that I was into before has to come through in that end user perspective too. That, right now, I think it's very hard for a normal saver, retail customer, to evaluate different type of strategies and what is working, what is not, what is meaningful, what is signaling, etc. And the problem is that reality is very complex and it's not very clear. So it's you might think it's just about communications, but it's not. First, there has to be a much more agreement what is important and what we should put our effort into, and then you can be clear in your communication toward retail users.
And unfortunately, communication, not proper media, but most of the others are trying to paint the picture either black or white. They want to create conflicts and tensions which are not there really, but because the world is grey actually all the time. But to simplify this complex word, they're trying to make it either black or white.
But speaking of complexities, we also wanted to dive into the topic of trade-offs, and sometimes you have to maybe balance, there could be conflicts between different goals, etc., when you're working towards climate solutions. So I'm thinking, for example, people talk now about climate justice and how you have to balance, different climate solutions with also social aspects, or there could be sometimes even climate solutions may have an impact on biodiversity. There could be biodiversity loss, or, so it's environment versus environment in some cases, or it could be local versus national or international. That context, we've seen that in Sweden very recently with how you can impact the local environment negatively, trying to solve the bigger issue, and so on. And so as an investor, Johan, would you say that you experience that when you look at your portfolio companies? Is that a reality that they have sometimes to deal with this, and how do you deal with it in turn as an active owner?
When the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs were launched about 6 years ago, we were very enthusiastic about this. We thought, here's a proxy for sustainable development. We have 17 different categories to work with. That should be great. And sort of with the ambition, let's do all. And pretty soon we realized that the complexity and the contradictions are just impossible to work with if you want to operationalize this. So we ended up, in impact investing, for example, we just focus on one, more or less, a little wider. But let's work with fresh water. That's something you can invest in. It's something you can work with. It's one of the greatest challenges. Biodiversity, water, climate, one of those. And I think you have to have the same kind of mindset when you're engaging. Because if you want to engage about everything with everybody, you're just going to spread yourself very thin and you won't get results. So you might have one part which is sort of keeping the system in place and being a little bit of a policeman to see that we're not allowing human rights violations in nature. But then you have to focus on specific topics with specific companies too, if you want to get results.
But is climate always a win-win? Or I'm thinking you are producing things, and ultimately we probably need to produce less things, but that's how you make your sales. So is there also a situation where maybe you cannot maximize profit if we're going to solve this crisis, or you have to rethink how you make your profit and so on?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a good way of putting it, actually, just rethinking it, because part of the story is, of course, if you have a really old product, it is better to get a newer one that is more efficient, has better materials in it, and make sure that you dispose of the other product in a good way. So I think we have an opportunity there to really make sure we help sort of, if you will, close that loop. Like, how do we take those products back, and how do we also design the products so that they are able to be torn down, able to be recycled in a good way. So it's not just about using the recycled materials or whatever it may be but what happens at the end. And we did a very interesting project, or we're still working with Scania Recycling, which is a big recycler here in Sweden, where we sent, for example, a bunch of, or we took out vacuum cleaners actually that they had received in their recycling flow, and looked at them, and some of our designers came and said, oh, I recognize that, I worked on that a few years ago, whatever it was, but we got big learnings in terms of things like, well, we thought these were easy to recycle, but Scania could point out to us, well, since it's put together in this way, we can't actually open it up, we can't touch it, so the whole thing has to go into the incinerator. Wow, that was a big aha for us, right? So again, there is this idea of working in partnerships. You can learn so much, right? And this end of life bit is very important for us to look at. But then there's also that tension between, okay, so how long should the life be? Where is the tipping point where it makes more sense to replace the product? We look a lot now at how can we help people repair their products themselves better. And again, how far can that go before you need a technician? And so we're testing different kinds of models there. And it is challenging, of course, because we are more used to this sell the product and buy versus, having that longer relationship and thinking about what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Just a brief comment that I think it's very important, much more than what is the case, that we are open about trade-offs.
Yeah.
Nothing is for free. You're always going to do something and sacrifice something else, sort of. And if we're honest and open about it, it could still be very easily, justified. Because the alternative, the risk of not doing anything, is so much worse. So it's going to cost us, but it's worth it. And if you come to communication, this aspect is sometimes not transmit it. Yeah, it's sort of if we're all good, we can all be rich, but if we're evil, we're going to be poor. It's not that simple.
But it will cost us, and will we pay with lower profitability, or I mean, in what way will we pay?
I think that I'm a true believer that sustainability and profitability goes hand in hand. So it's just about that you need to, and I think the long-term sort of perspective of that is that, I mean, if you do not transform as a company, you will sooner or later not be relevant because no one will buy products from your work where you invest in you. But short-term, you need to challenge your business model as well. And I think one of them is to try to maybe, for example, go away from selling a product to have a subscription model, where you maybe can extend the life length of the product by changing key components, like, I don't know, a compressor or an engine or a sort of element or what it is. And that way you sort of offer additional value in your subscription model while you use the product. It's a different sort of customer journey that you create. And I think so challenge either the way you charge for it, but also sort of who do you actually sell to? Maybe you should sell another. I heard about the UK company now that is sort of revolutionizing the way that you consume electricity by just bundling it together with different kinds of services and sort of the grid sort of meters and but also then different kinds of add-on services like heaters and charging for your car and charging for sort of your electrical appliances and so on. I think that way of sort of changing the customer behavior in their direction, I think is one way also to challenge your business model.
That's interesting. I mean, how are you selling steel on a subscription?
Yeah, working on that one.
Maybe we should talk about that.
No, but I think it is actually that at least, and when it comes to steel, I think it is more about trying to understand the value chain, and I think and understand your customers' operation, and that way sort of challenge the way you calculate, and the way you look at CO2 versus cost, and then show that actually the gap is very small. But it could also be that the way you sell it, and for example, if you produce green steel, you don't use fossil gas, you don't use fossil coks, you use renewable energy, and suddenly the biggest part of your cost is energy, and that you can get on quite long-term contract, which means that instead of selling to Electrolux maybe on a 12-month contract, suddenly you can offer maybe many years. And I think those sort of things that maybe is also a trigger point to say, okay, but then actually we go from the brown to the green steel. So I think it is about challenging the whole business model.
And I think that's perfectly true, that you need to have long-term contracts in order to change the system. Because if you have short contracts, you roll around the short earnings.
Yeah.
And the same goes for the privatization of infrastructure in Sweden. Now we are talking about high-speed railroads, but we're not sure about the business model.
Interesting. I mean, that's also, you mentioned we're moving from transactions to relationships. I mean, how does it work in the insurance company industry? And well, is that a relational industry, or
Yes, of course, yes.
of course it
Very
is.
much about relations and having them with us when you actually are often in a crisis. So it's not really the consumer goods, but it's I guess it's I don't really know what to say. It's of course it's important. I'm thinking many different kinds of solutions, but also we see that it's quite hard to change and quite old-fashioned industry in a new innovative way. I think we need new business models and to calculate on new positive thing for our customers. But for an example, we have now when it comes to claim settlements, our customers really want something take place very fast. They want cash settlements. If your phone is broken, then you just want cash and then go and buy a new phone. And when it comes to the case of end of life and try to recycle and not have this waste that we need to reduce, then it's quite a trade-off because we want to work in a long-term way with our customers, and also to in a way make this opportunity to actually have the customers' goods recycled. So we don't really, we have to, it's like trial and error. So we can see that if they really understand the point of going more sustainable, then it's one way. But the majority of our customers are not really there, and we have to work against some other changes or systems in our within our industry. So it's quite hard actually. Still, but I believe I'm an optimist. I believe that we can change, but it takes some time, and we don't have time. That's the huge problem here.
So that's good bridge over to, I mean,
Great.
time and also ownership. I think that we should touch upon because the role of ownership in the transformation that we are facing. Henrik, I mean, you choose to a different type of owner that you're used to. I mean, we are all facing owners in one way or another, but perhaps you could elaborate on why you choose to or happen to face yourself in this situation with a private equity type of owner.
Yeah, and I think that the traditional sort of classical private equity model of sort of keeping the company for 6-7 years, I think that is actually diminishing. I think that having a more sort of going concern sort of approach, I think has been a trend in private equity for quite some time now, which I think is good. It's positive because, of course, private equity can find, and also venture cap can find sort of capital and invest it in stages that drives innovation. And I can see being on one hand in a 125-year-old company and a 1-year-old company. Of course, on one hand you have the strength of the legacy with knowledge and experience and customer base and everything, but you also have limitations in how much you can maneuver your balance sheet. And your balance sheet is partly equity but also debts. So how do you finance a completely new sort of venture within a legacy structure? There are ways to do that, and many good examples of that. But it's also a good way to sort of get off, and especially if you want to challenge an existing industry like we're going to do. We try to sort of transform a whole, not a company, but a whole industry. Then I would say it is a huge advantage that the access to capital, when you come with a greenfield operation, where you can show that actually everything you do is going to be sustainable. It's not like we do one part of our product range and then, by the way, is the legacy. That is attractive for capital. It is, and it also comes in with a lower risk premium and different appetite. So I think that yes, the type of capital is important, and I think also maybe, but it's not that people are saying that we will invest in you and then we want to have a return in 2 years. I think there is an understanding that this is like building a new industry, that they are in it for a long term.
Interesting.
Yeah, much longer than maybe the perception.
You were nodding. Please.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, the companies that will be the great leaders in 10 or 20 years are probably not the one who have been around for 100 years. So the innovation, I think, is extremely important for the transition, and I think the private equity sector should have much more cheering for this. They're taking a risk, so that's the big thing. So they should have the reward if they're doing this job. And I also think that from an investor's perspective, there is actually, the demand for green investments is much bigger than the supply. So there's really, I mean, we need more innovators. I mean, we need more projects to finance. If you look at green investments, both within green bonds and things like that, but also within private equity, now this is a couple of years ago, we actually had one of our partners that said, if we want to keep the quality on the investments, there's nothing out there. So we returning, you have committed money, you get them back, because we can't promise to invest this with the quality you're asking for. And I mean, that's unheard of. No, we don't want your money. You can do it, whatever. Hopefully this is changing now, but I mean, the transition has to go through all the different, there is a chain with a lot of links.
You were saying before, Johan, how maybe there's something along the lines of maybe there's too high expectations on what the financial industry can do. And there was recently an essay by a former BlackRock employee, which many people have read, I think, about how maybe ESG, sustainable investment is what he said, a dangerous placebo, and maybe it's not as effective as we're hoping, because it's all these trillions of dollars. So, it's easy to make it sound like a big game changer. But what's your view on that? How much can we lean on owners to push corporations in the direction that they need to go?
I think, even though I know there's a lot of debate around him and what he did at BlackRock, etc., but I think he has a point. And he also used funny wordings. He said something like, "Yeah, we're giving wheatgrass to cancer patients." So that's good. But I think he's right in the sense that in the industry we're doing a lot of things that really will have a very marginal effect, and we have to focus more on doing things that really contributes to the transition. So, and I think ownership is definitely part of it, no doubt. I don't know if there's anything you can do that is more obvious in that you're actually changing the real economy. And just one example is from engine number one at Exxon annual meeting before the summer, where they actually, made them change their board. So they introduced new board members that the company didn't choose themselves. And this is a change within our community. Before, this type of more, I don't know what to call it, aggressive ownership has been very unusual, and more from non-investor actors like unions and churches and things like that. But now it's moving into big pension funds and hedge fund, etc. So my prediction for the future is voting going to be more important, and it's going to drive climate change in a new wave, much more to individuals with importance.
More active, even more active ownership. Yeah.
But
Sorry.
No.
I think it's your turn.
Okay. Isn't that another important step also to change the rules of the game? And these are set by the society, the politicians. So they need to change the rules of the game for this really to accelerate and to happen. Otherwise, you can pour capital into it if you get stuck in a legal requirement or a policy or something that hinders the development.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is part of what I meant when I said that expectations are sometimes too high. For example, this pricing problem that everybody agree on, that as long as it's free to just emit your greenhouse gases, you have the market forces against you. And if we don't change that, everything else would be not futile, but it won't have that effect.
So we almost mentioned a global carbon tax.
Yes.
We were wondering if we could do this without.
How long would it take? But that's, I mean, of course. But Karin,
but one positive aspect as well is that, for example, the green bonds. It's the more transparent reporting. I mean, for us as institutional investors, that's key to actually make good investments. So I think I think you're absolutely right. I think something happens, even if it takes small steps. This reporting issue or aspect is very, very important. And so to be able to make good decisions, we need that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you push your portfolio companies to report, for instance, in relation to TCFD. Is that what you're
or in green bond
or green bonds? So yeah,
for example, that framework.
Yeah.
Can I just add also that I think that the owners, yes, the investors and their sort of capabilities within the supervisory board or the sort of non-executive board. But I'd say that I believe just as important is the management, and at the end of the day, the CEO. And of course the owners, they can change the CEO, and maybe that is the most powerful tool they can do. But it's just as much the responsibility of a CEO today. 100 of the 100 biggest economies in the world, I think 70 are corporations, and that includes countries. So CEOs today, they have to step up the game. They have to sort of understand that they have a big responsibility and think about the legacy, not only about their sort of private legacy, family and so on, but also of handing over an even stronger company to the next generation. And I think that a lot of responsibility lies on those shoulders. And
we're going to go to let you in also who are listening in, because we only have a little less than 10 minutes to go.
So I'm looking at my
Torkel.
iPhone here, and that's not because I think this is so, not at all interesting, because I have my questions here from the audience here. A question to perhaps Electrolux, a question to Electrolux and the other firms. You are saying you are working on models where you will try to make consumers use your products in a more environmentally friendly way. However, is it really up to consumers that should bear the responsibility? Is it not you as firms who are responsible for developing environmentally friendly firms? So it's, how do you distribute responsibility? That's something that also is debated.
But I see very much there it's a shared responsibility, right? We can only do so much. We can make these great products, right? But we know also people don't look at the user manuals. Do
you know what they say about shared responsibilities?
There is no responsibility then, yeah. No, but I think if it's a handshake, a handoff, because I think also, I mean, for example, we did a study looking at 14,000 people or 12,000 people across Europe, right? And looked at their laundry habits. And people are using the same habits that their parents taught them, that their parents taught them. You know, they're not changing. But we know then we have a window of opportunity, right? Like I think it's the first, depending on the product, 90 days or so when the person has the product in their home to actually show them and change the behavior. And I think technology, like a connected product, being able to communicate with the person more will help them. I think it's a combination of us perhaps setting defaults, you know, the sustainable option being the default, so that you don't have to think about it, you just press the auto and that's what happens. But also we need to nudge people and get that behavior to change. And I would say
I liked very much that 30 is the new 40.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
That's what I will take with me from I mean, listen to you before.
Yeah, and I mean, to explain that, right? You need to turn the temperature down to 30 degrees. You get the same results.
It's not about age.
No, it's temperature.
Temperature. So, very good. Thank you. So another question here. Does any of the panelists have a view on how we can make the trade-offs when financial and sustainability impacts are measured in different currencies? So we have one currency for money, and the other one is how do we manage that? I know that you are thinking about that, and in one way or another, translate it.
No, but I think that we need eventually, and I know that some companies are working on that you create just like you have a balance sheet and an income statement in money, you should have it in CO2, and I think that's at least a good mindset. And then I think it will only require a price on carbon. Sorry, but and there are unofficial prices today in like Europe to then put the monetary value on both of those sets of reporting. And I think that maybe that's the way forward.
Anyone who wants to ship?
I mean, it's a good thought. The issue is then who owns the balance sheet of the history of the industrialization process, which has led us to the situation where we're at. Who is responsible for the debt? Or should we only look forward? That interesting question.
Yeah, and it also comes back to, I mean, if something is free, it's not on the balance sheet, and it's also a matter of what you sell to your customer, how much carbon do your customers buy also from you. So I think it's interesting to look upon it from also a value chain perspective in that sense. So another question is about the blockers. What are the biggest blockers internally to implement circular or other sustainable initiatives in your business? Could it be structure, culture, knowledge, control systems, accounting?
All of those.
All of those above.
What are the biggest block that you need to work around?
I would say knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
Yeah.
It's how you set up the system internally or the operation. Who knows what about sustainability or new innovative systems? So I guess we need to, of course, it depends on if it's a new company or an old company and which industry you work. But I definitely think that we need new knowledge and more knowledge, widespread in different sectors.
I would say culture, because I think culture takes a long time to change, and we don't have that time. It's urgent, sort of talking about targets and so on. They should be short term. So I think that is so sort of how do you, and then I think the solution rather of changing culture is to try to find something in the culture that you can sort of build a change on and connect it.
We have so many questions coming in from the audience, but we also only have 5 more minutes. So we wanted to wrap up with a question to each of you about the future. And we're going to have to essentially halve emissions every 10 years. And so it's not going to be this hockey stick where we like do some things and then we do more and more and more. And then finally we do a lot. It's going to be the opposite rather. So let's say that we meet here in 3 years from now. It's on a few months away from 2025. Where are you? What has happened since then in your organizations and your industry? What do you think? Because 3 years is a short time, but it's also a long time, depending on how you view it.
Shall I start?
I'll start with you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Within 3 years, we have, I would say, not completed, but almost the transformation of the transport system into electrified system. The products will be available. The energy will hopefully be available. And the customers are starting to get used to this kind of technology and to operate it. And we are on our way, I would say.
And I would say that we much more focus on resilience than we do today. The costs of not having a resilient society and who should bear the costs of a more climate affected world. So unfortunately, more focus on resilience.
Johan?
We are working very intensely right now to produce a climate action plan with a net zero 2050 ambition. And I mean, as you mentioned, the curve is probably not straight, it's something else. So it's going to be very important. And I think this connection is of great value, that you have the long-term ambition, then you make action plans for the coming year, the 2025, etc. And since this is such a strong trend within the industry, I'm very hopeful. I think almost every sustainable investor will have one, and it will become much more practical than things have been before. And you can have intermediate targets that you report on yearly to follow whether the transition is actually taking place or it's not. So I think that's one of the hopeful things.
Yeah, great.
In 3 years, I think in 3 years you will definitely see us having products out on the market that are clearly much more sustainable. We are having much more of a dialogue with our consumers about what we are doing. And I think those subtle hints and tips and tricks that are coming in, or those subtle just behavior changes, will be really embedded in our products and their working. And I think within our operations, we will have taken great strides, particularly looking at things like diversity and inclusion. That is very important to us as well, but also with getting to our carbon neutral operations, which we plan to do by 2030. So just a few areas there.
Yeah, great. And Henrik?
Yeah, at the end of 2024, then we are starting production of fossil-free steel in northern Sweden. And I think at that time, we probably have a few more sites around the world on its way. But maybe even more important that I think it has pushed for a transformation of the whole industry, shown that it's positive. And we are so big, but then when all the others are following, then things will happen.
Great.
Fantastic. So time to wrap up, and we would just like to say thank you to the audience. but of course to the panel here, panelists for taking your time and sharing your experiences and knowledge around challenges and potential solutions. And much appreciated to have you here, and for you that you stayed for the whole hour.